All right, here we are. I believe that this is actually session 9 already. Can you believe
Whoa.
it? Yeah,
Whoa.
we're just about out of single digits, and we're not out of the introduction yet. That is so typical of us. But it's great to be here. Glad you're all here. And for everybody who's watching this recording on the archives, welcome to the fold. And we're glad that you're with us as well. We're going to be starting on page 20. So you can dial that up. We're going to be just moving back one paragraph so we can get a running start on things. But before we do that, as always, any unfinished business, anything from last week or the week of processing that you would like to put on the table before we dive into some new material?
Is it okay for me to click where it says,
The blue button, Linda.
Yes. Click the blue button.
thank you?
You got it. Okay, so here we go, page 20. We're moving back a bit. This section is the second to the last section of the introduction, and it's called Passions and Practice. And a lot of this has been, so far, has been just talking about passions. And the way he's defining passions is basically an excess of emotion. If you go back to page 19, his first line basically gives us the definition. So an excess of emotion, of feelings, is what he's calling passions. And it's these passions can be either positive or negative. The case that he's making is that these strong emotions that we feel are not from external sources, but really come from within. And so in that first paragraph, he's talking about the mistake that we often make when we're feeling these passions, especially if they're negative, is to look outside and find some blame someplace and try to pin it on that. But the problem is, as long as we're doing that, then we're not looking at the real source. And we are absolving ourselves from the responsibility that we still have as individuals for our own behavior. So we can't say that the devil made me do it, or our parents made us do it, or the circumstances made us do it. We are responsible for the response to our excess of emotion, our passions, whether they're positive or negative. So he's trying to make the case here that we need to become, as this section is all about, well, the next section actually is about awareness, to become aware. What's going on? What's happening? Why are we feeling so strongly about whatever it is that we're feeling? And then to start to take hold of that. The chapter, a little subheading before, was about dispassion. And that was about making sure that we moderate those passions. And that's really going to be the theme of this section, is that wherever these passions are coming from, whether they're positive or negative, but this excess of emotion can be very distracting, and it can be blinding in terms of us being able to be present to reality as it is presenting at the moment. And so they need to be moderated. We need to be able to step aside from them. We need to become dispassionate, at least to the extent that we can be present, because nothing takes us out of the moment more securely than an excess of emotion. All right. Any questions on just trying to get the lay of the land here? Okay, so let's go ahead and start on the last paragraph of page 20. This is back one paragraph from where we left off last week. And I think what I want to do is actually read all the way to the end of this section, which is only 3 pages, and get a run for it, and then we'll come back and discuss. So he says, most spiritual people think we only have to watch out for the negative or nasty passions like anger, conceit, envy, avarice, fear, lust. But after years of observing both myself and many that I have directed, I've come to see that so-called positive emotions and excitements can be just as blinding and narrowing in their practical effect as negative ones. This is a surprise for most of us. Do you know that passions for the early church usually referred to something we suffer and suffer from, in contradistinction to something we consciously and freely choose to do? Passion was not usually referring to sex as we use it today, A passion is probably much closer to what we now mean by an addiction or some compulsive, unconscious behavior. Positive and exciting emotions are just as blinding and binding, or the other way around, as negative ones, even if they don't first appear that way, because we soon try to sustain them by more entertainments and diversions. It is the Western consumer mind. Now, we talked about this quite a bit last week, and we're realizing, okay, he's painting a pretty negative view of passions and was kind of whittling it down to sexual passion. But we talked about passion as being basically our bliss. You know, what is it that gives us that excess of emotion in a positive way on something that we just love to do, that we're wired to do, that pops us out of bed like a piece of toast in the morning? You know, those are the things. There's nothing wrong with those. And in the next paragraph, he's going to say there's nothing wrong with those things. But we want to just make sure that we're getting as broad an idea of what passions are all about. You know, they can be negative or positive in the emotional content, and they can also be, you know, very positive in terms of the effect that they have on our lives and the things that we can do with them, as long as they're moderated. And that's going to be the main key. Are they moderated, or are they running away from us? Because if they are running away from us, the positive ones certainly can turn into addictions and compulsions. And if they're negative, then they can turn the other way into all sorts of neuroses. So that being aware of our excess of emotion and what we do with them is going to be very important in the contemplative practice, in the contemplative way. Making sense? Okay, so going on, he says, think of an interdependent love relationship or exciting opportunities to meet, serve, fix, and change things for the good. An adventurous and fun day ahead of us. Every passing infatuation with anything. That wonderful glow after a momentary success. Eagerness for a great meal or a great anything. These are all good things, and God does not begrudge us the enjoyment of such good things. But positive energies can be equally binding, because soon the search to repeat, continue, or increase the momentary high becomes an entire way of life. Most addictions begin with something that was, first of all, quite good and fine. Now we know that there is even a physiological basis for this, a release of oxytocin or adrenaline, which feels exciting. We call it a rush. And it can indeed rush us into illusory, self-perpetuating, and finally isolated places where we only want to repeat the fix. Finally, a small confession. I remember more than once being very impatient with a listener or student of mine who disagreed with me precisely after I had just given what I thought was a truly excellent and exceptional talk. At that moment, I was so filled with myself and my inspiration that my ego inflation allowed me to dismiss that person to myself as bothersome or ignorant. On some level, I wondered, why don't they just congratulate me or thank me? I'm very ashamed to admit this, and it led me to see that the blinding nature of the pride and conceit within me. I had grown used to being worshipped. We are all temporarily inflated inside of any wonderful anything and become impatient and even harsh when anything gets in our path. Think of people on overstimulating vacations, or the bored, irritated looks of people in line for food, entertainment, or an airplane flight. The search for full fun is its own form of dualistic entrapment. Such pleasure cruises can even be more dangerous than funks, precisely because we are not prepared to spot them as problematic. They are not, of course, bad or sinful in and of themselves, just dangerous in the way that they create the need for more of a good thing, which is how we get subtly fooled and set out on a wrong track. I guess that is why fortitude, temperance, prudence, and patience were called the four cardinal virtues. Cardo, the root of cardinal, means hinge in Latin. And even faith, hope, and love are not effective or healing unless they are hinged onto fortitude, temperance, prudence, and patience. Again, the ancients were wiser than modern psychology might have assumed. Okay, so he keeps coming back to this theme of moderating these passions in life. All right. Any comments or observations on those few paragraphs?
I think it nails so much of what we experience in Orange County, is that there's always not enough or a comparison to you know, in the old days we called it keeping up with the Joneses, but I see it predominantly here in Orange County where there's so much affluence, that I see people kind of almost on I have close associate that I worked with, that it was like nonstop having to go to rock concerts or concerts. It was just like it was nonstop. There was no way to settle and just be alone or be quiet or go for a walk. Anyway, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just working on replacing a bathtub in our house, and I even feel it when I go around and look at bathtubs. It's like, oh, this is the latest, you know, and I've got maybe 15-year-old nice plumbing hardware, but it's perfectly fine, probably better quality materials than anything else. And I know when we go walking and going to buy this tub, they're going to tell me, oh, you need to get everything new now. And I'm like, do I really? You know, and I feel that within myself, like, oh yeah, I shouldn't use the old stuff. And yet there's nothing wrong with it. It's cool Italian design. It's like, I see that in myself, that
Mm-hmm.
urge to press the envelope a little harder.
Yeah, he says that right on the last paragraph on page 21. It is the Western consumer mind, right? That consumer mentality.
Just one more example. There's a beautiful home up the street from us. The prior owners had done a beautiful kind of Tuscan stone that looked just like Tuscany. And this new couple bought it and they painted everything, the rocks, the walls, black, the white, with a white kind of farmhouse look, which is really trending right now. And it just killed me to watch them paint natural materials, which are timeless. And, you know, 10 years from now, next person's going to move in. They're going to say, you know, that's old school. That's passe. So it's changed to something else.
Yeah, I was just thinking how social media, you know, is our cultural display of our inability to moderate passions.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Unless you have it internal. But no, I don't need that. Nope. Yeah.
One good thing that I'm seeing is there is a reaction now on our younger generations. They're going back minimalist now, and they're
Yeah.
pulling back from this. They're gravitating toward tiny homes. They're gravitating toward the smallest amount of things. One of the funniest things I heard was, you know, it was what's the Gen Z or whatever is below millennials laughing at baby boomers because all the pillows we put on our beds. You know, we'll put a dozen pillows on the bed, and you know, they put nothing on the bed, just the pillow they sleep on, and they're just laughing at boomers because they're so excessive, you know. But I think this is a good trend, you know, that our younger generations are starting to push back and have a reaction to this excess of emotion regarding consumption.
Well, and on that same line of thinking, I think we're all finding too that a lot of the younger generation, they don't really want the things that grandma has or that even your parents have or we have. They don't want china handed down to them or antiques. They want their own new stuff. And we found that a lot too, that the things that we find valuable or sentimental, they don't really find that sentimental now. And they're not being mean about it. They're just sort of saying, no, it's just not my thing. Yeah, no, I could pass on that and I just will go minimalist. So yeah, it's just interesting.
Yeah. The pendulum is always swinging.
We've also observed that in the same vein that they're not going out and buying expensive furnishings like some of us did or our parents did, you know, the big armoire and heavy furniture. They order from Wayfair or Amazon, and they put stuff together themselves because it functions, but there's not a huge investment in that kind of thing. So it clearly, it seems like those things don't matter as much. And what we've seen is that experience does. They want to do things. They want to experience things.
It's interesting because of the move. I've spent way too many hours on YouTube with decor and all that kind of stuff. And what the trendsetters are saying is, while minimalism is a thing, they are now, it's been thematic with the interior designers that we are going back to valuing the old furniture, bringing in like Facebook Marketplace, getting the older pieces, and having more stuff. So it's like it's interesting that we're already moving in that direction. We still have the hardcore minimalists, but it's moving back into collectible arts and old pieces, which is much better, I think, than buying some of the new stuff, unless, like you were saying, Brady, that it's, like putting furniture together from Wayfair or IKEA, But it's interesting how the pendulum swings all over the place in efforts to get people to buy. But I'm for the symbolism piece.
So here's the cynic in me. Is the pendulum really swinging back to that type of furniture? Or is that someone with something to sell trying to swing the pendulum back to what they have to sell? It's
Trying
hard
to create a
say.
brand. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Who knows? But yeah, Danielle, you've been right in the thick of all of that. But
yeah, I mean, these are interior designers, and I'm sure they have their people, sponsors and stuff like that, but been pretty thematic. Anyways.
yeah. So here's the theme, passions can be positive, negative. They can be based on things that are healthy, things that are unhealthy. But whatever they are, by their very nature, if we really are going to move down a contemplative path, they need to be moderated. Just like we would be moderating our thought stream, our intellect and intellectual thought stream, we're going to need to moderate the passions as well. And we don't often think of that in the same way that we think of our intellectual thought stream in terms of mindfulness, but our emotions get just as much in the way from being able to be present as our thoughts do. So we need to look at both sides and work on both sides if we are really going to take this contemplative journey. So he continues, he says, think of an interdependent love relationship on page 21. Exciting opportunities to meet, serve, fix, and change things for the good, adventurous and fun day, passing infatuation with anything, the wonderful glow after a momentary success, eagerness for a great meal or anything. These are all good things, and God does not begrudge us the enjoyment. But positive energies can be equally binding, because soon the search to repeat, continue, or increase the momentary high becomes an entire way of life. Most addictions begin with something that was first of all quite good and fine. Now we know there is even physiological basis for this, a release of oxytocin and adrenaline, which feels exciting. We call it a rush, and it can indeed rush us into illusory, self-perpetuating, and finally isolated places where we only want to repeat the fix. This is why the early church made the big distinction between consolations and desolations that I've talked about here over and over again. And it's always been interesting to me that the contemporary church is so focused on the consolations, and they have turned that into something that is tantamount to connection with God and a healthy faith walk. If you're feeling those highs, if you're feeling those feelings, I often got the sense in the charismatic churches that we were chasing that high with every worship service. And Sunday after Sunday, we would try to top the Sunday before. And we always had that pressure to go more and go more and go more. And I saw that kind of psychology at play there. And so we want to make sure that we balance the way the ancient church, the wisdom of the ancient church, balanced these, and saying consolations have their place, but they need to be balanced by the desolations. And that largely the consolations were people who were young in the faith, the early converts, because they needed that feeling in order to get through and get into a groove, get into a discipline, into the ritual and the rhythms of their faith walk. And then the desolations would set in. That safety net was pulled. And as John of the Cross colorfully put it, he called it his dark ray of faith that was so pure that it became absolutely transparent. It became invisible to him. But he believed that it was still there, and he was able to carry on. But we need to be able to balance the two and not just assume that as soon as a desolation set in, as soon as we don't feel God's presence anymore, that something's wrong, or that we're doing it wrong, or that God has abandoned us, or God is punishing us in any way. That's kind of the message that I certainly got in church. I don't know if you've gotten the same sort of message, but nothing could be further from the truth from the early church's point of view, or from any contemplative point of view. We know that there is going to be this mix and this balance between the two, and there needs to be. Go ahead, Tony.
No, I remember when the effect was more involved with the recovery community, and I see these new people coming out of, or just into the 28-day program, and they would get God in God of their understanding. And we used to talk about them going on a pink cloud, where their perspective was they just got a God shot, I think it was called. And that's all. I mean, that's all they were for a long period of time. And I always wondered, how do you transition from that pink cloud, into a more grounded relationship with God? And this, what you were just.
Yeah, we in the field call that flight into hell.
I like that. I like it a lot. But this sort of reminded me of where that balance comes in, because I know some of these folks, I still know some people that have been on a pink cloud for 10 years, but yeah, this kind of explains to me anyway, where you can find a balance in that if you find yourself too far over to one side, like being on a pink cloud.
Well, it's kind of interesting, Tony. You said, how do you transition, from the pink cloud into a more grounded relationship? And I don't know that you transition. I think life transitions you.
Yeah.
Because the pink cloud does not last and cannot last, but anybody who's in the pink cloud would never trade it for anything else. And so, you're in the cloud, you want to stay there. But just like one of those cartoon characters who runs off the edge of a cliff and doesn't realize there's nothing beneath them for a few more steps until they look down and then fall. That's kind of the feeling when you run out past the edge of the pink cloud. All of a sudden you realize, man, there's nothing there. What do I do? And so you either come to terms with it or you don't. You either go back and you try to recreate the emotion that you felt before, or you give up, you go into despair, or maybe you press on through. The tragedy is if the newcomer, if the acolyte hasn't been at all prepared for this shape of the journey, then it's really difficult. But at least if you know somewhere in the back of your mind that this is what always happens, then you can have a better chance of weathering that difficulty, weathering that apparent abandonment, and continuing on. But the church and a lot of recovery programs, I think recovery programs are better than the church at it in terms of preparing people for the shape of the journey. But they have to be prepared. That's our duty if we're going to be teaching at all, is to prepare people for the shape of the journey.
I'm reading Hind's Feet in High Places by Hannah Hurnard, which I read years ago. And it's a Pilgrim's Progress type of allegory. And the heroine is called Much Afraid. And she wants to go to the high places in the mountains with the Good Shepherd. So he gives her two traveling companions. And the two traveling companions are named Sorrow and Suffering. And he experiences great blisses along the way, but it's just interesting that sorrow and suffering are her companions on the path to greater experience with the great shepherd. So you're smiling, William. Are you familiar with the book? Oh, I read it years ago at Bible college, and it's pretty good. So I'm being moved by it right now as I'm reading it. So, but that's maybe how you hit those desolations. Because I like what you said, Dave. The sorrow and suffering, it's coming anyway. I mean, nobody's exempt from it. So the question is, will we accept them as good companions, right, to bring us closer to God and grow our faith, right? Or will we whine and complain and blame God and try to fight, right? I mean,
What's the name of the book?
it's called Hind's Feet on High Places, and you can get it on Kindle for 39 cents. Hind's Feet on High Places. By Hannah Hernard. She wrote it, probably 100 years ago now, early 1900s. Well, she wrote it probably in 1930s, I think. She wrote it.
So really what we're describing is the shape of any relationship, right? I mean, think of a love relationship. You know, we start with the honeymoon phase, we start with the passions and the highs, and we think that that's the way it's supposed to be, especially with our current notion of romantic love. You know, you find your soulmate, and then you're going to be on that high for the rest of your lives together. 30 or 40 years, you can sustain that, but obviously that's not the way it works. You know, but that doesn't mean that the love doesn't continue. That doesn't mean that the love doesn't mature and deepen. But that excess of emotion is certainly going to change over time and ebb and flow and do the things. But it's like that with a new car or a new job or anything else that we connect with. You know, it's going to have that same shape to it. Why do we imagine that our faith journey will not? Now, God is constant, but we're still just as human as we ever were. And so we're going to have the same shape to the journey. And so realizing that is important, but also moderating the passions is important. I know I've told you the story many times, but the story of the young monk who was so on fire for God that he literally levitated above his brothers, you know, in the chapel. And after weeks of this, finally the abbot comes in and he says, "You get down, grow up, and join your brothers. You know, this is over." Now, we would think, my God, if you can levitate, you have reached some high peak of you know, spiritual maturity or heights of a mature presence. And yet, get down, grow up, and join your brothers. You know, so this is the message, and this has always been the message in the ancient church and in other traditions as well. We've kind of lost it, and folks like Richard Rohr are trying to point us back. And contemplation understands this intimately. And so contemplation will point us back as well. But we need to realize that we do need to moderate these things, or we're always going to be blinded to what's right in front of us. So turning the page, he gives us this little story about himself, a small confession. "I remember more than once being very impatient with a listener, a student who disagreed with me precisely after I had given what I thought was a truly excellent and exceptional talk. At that moment, I was so thrilled with myself and my inspiration that my ego inflation allowed me to dismiss that person to myself as bothersome or ignorant. On some level, I wondered, why don't they just congratulate me or thank me? I'm very ashamed to admit this, and it led me to see the blinding nature of the pride and conceit within me. I had grown used to being worshipped." You know, sometimes I wonder, you know, you hear these stories of these political figures or celebrities or whatever, you know, and they end up trashing their whole careers and even lives sometimes, going off the ditch in ways that you just say, how in the world did that happen? But I think you get used to being worshipped, right? You start believing your own press, and you end up in this little bubble where everything makes rational sense to you, but you're no longer in touch with reality. And the passions can take us there. How many times have you been in a passionate place, either with a love relationship or whatever. And you look back on it now and say, how in the world did I make those choices? You know, but at the time it made perfect sense, right? Or you weren't thinking about it at all because you were just along for the ride. The train left the station, you were on it, and that's all she wrote. But these are the kinds of things that we're also talking about in terms of these excessive emotions.
Can
Dave,
I,
if I could, go ahead. Go ahead.
last night we were listening to person talk about like a quarterback, losing his focus when he's out during the game. And the guy was talking about how he's learned for himself and when he coaches other people to keep their focus, he said he encouraged them to find that oh, what do you call it? A little short saying. So for this is important. That was what turned his thinking and helped him refocus. This is important. So the quarterback was able to go on and do what he needed to do. And the speaker was saying that when he speaks, like say it's at a church service and then there's another church service, I'm imagining this is when it would happen, that somebody comes and kind of critiques him. He doesn't take that really well at that point. He's looking for affirmations, but he said, I realize it's more important to hear what they're trying to say because they've got my back. They're not criticizing, they've got my back. They're seeing my blind spots. And I thought kudos to him that he could recognize that. Yeah. So,
What I,
yeah,
I'm
go ahead.
sorry, go ahead.
I'm
No,
done.
no, I was just gonna say, Dave, let me maybe inflate your ego a little bit. But many, many weeks ago, you were talking about people, throughout your time as a teaching pastor at the Effect, you get a lot of people giving you a lot of accolades, a lot of kudos for helping them. And you were commenting about, there's a point where you don't want to have that take you into that egoic place, kind of like what Rohr's kind of admitting to here. And you've made comments I thought was very interesting. You did say that at some point you're listening to it, but you're not listening to it, so that in some way it's not taking you to that place of, oh, I'm great, I can help people. Maybe I'm greater than now. And I appreciated what you had said about that. But
No.
yeah.
Yeah.
But the
Thanks,
caveat
David.
is I don't mean to be inflating your ego right now to respond
Oh,
to
that's
that.
okay. I remember when I was in my mid-20s, I went on a musical tour with people, right? And we'd blow into some of these really small towns where they really didn't have a whole lot of entertainment. We were it, right? And so they treated us like Elvis Presley, and screaming and yelling, and all these young girls would come up sometimes afterwards and they'd want me to sign their clothing or their arm or their forehead or something. And I was saying, what do you want me to, you're never gonna wash your hand again? I mean, how long is this really gonna last? And who would care about my, signature sometimes? At any rate, to look back on that now is to realize they were caught up in an excess of emotion that really had absolutely nothing to do with me. It had to do with what they were feeling. I just happened to be the object du jour. And so I kind of carried that with me because I remember that so vividly. And so, it's great to get compliments. And I've learned to finally just say thank you, rather than try to, deflect it or do any of the crazy things that we do. Just say thank you. But realize, they're in the glow of something that they experienced that has to do with them and the spirit. and I happen to be a conduit at the moment, but it's really not so much about me. It's about the experience that they're having. So yeah, I found a way to be able to separate some of those things. And the other thing too is, when, like, I think I've also mentioned, if people would come and say, oh, you saved my life, or the effect saved my life because, when I was in the midst of my addiction, this and this and this, but remember at the beginning of this section where Rohr says, we are responsible. We can't point out there to blame the things that we do out of our passions, but we also got to make sure that we don't look out there and abdicate the responsibility that we have taken for our own wellness and the journey that we have taken, because we took that journey. I tell people, yeah, I was just the millionth guy over your bridge, and because you were recovery waiting to happen. If it hadn't been me that showed up, it would have been whoever showed up next, because you took the journey. And I try to, if the moment's appropriate, to shine that back on them, because they need to understand that they took the journey. If it hadn't been for them, they wouldn't have gotten where they were going. I was a movable piece. And that also keeps me humble. I'm not believing my own press. And also cleaning the church every Saturday morning with John and Linda keeps me humble too. Nothing like scrubbing a toilet to keep your feet on the ground. But yeah, it's really important for us all of us to do that, to see clearly, the relationship that we have with everybody, the roles that we're playing, and to make sure that we're still as present as we can be, because it's so easy to get off track. And we all have these needs, affection and esteem, and to be spectacular and powerful and relevant and all of that. And so it's a very short step into getting into some areas that are going to be blinding again. And the whole point is to stay aware and present, alert, words that Jesus uses all the time, so that we're really seeing what's in front of us. So the moral of that story is never autograph someone's forehead. It's not worth it.
Dave, I also found myself thinking that you probably have a lot of people paying you compliments, after a service, and on some level, you can't really trust like those types of compliments fully, right? Because they're yes, there are these people who are moved by the service and so on, but it's a polite thing to say after the service. Hey, good service, right? So anyhow, I just throwing that out there.
William, it reminds me of where Gail and I grew up. It seemed like almost every church, and the Lutheran Church, Methodist, Baptist, the pastor would be standing at the door that everybody had to exit through and be shaking everybody's hands, trying to just be friendly. And yet, what do you say to the guy if you were sleeping through half of his message? So I was going to tease Dave. I go to coffee with Dave, and I brought Bodie with a couple times. So last Sunday we had Bodie in church with us, and as soon as Dave started talking, he fell asleep.
That keeps you grounded, you see?
That keeps you.
Yeah.
I figured I'd deflate Dave just a second there,
That's okay. I look out while I'm giving a message, and I see a few people who have also fallen asleep as well. So
Well, we're meditating, Dave.
Oh, yes, of course. I always remember Pat Boone telling me, Pat Boone, for those of you who don't know, he and his wife Shirley came to our church for about 6 or 7 years before Shirley died. But Pat Boone would tell me, not at our church, of course, never at our church, but in other churches, he actually had a small penknife, and he would stab himself in the thigh to keep himself awake. Inside his pocket, he'd be poking his leg with this penknife to keep himself awake. And I just thought, oh, that's hilarious, But I remember this great story that I know I've told you at least on a Sunday before, and it was Mr. Rogers. Fred Rogers, when he was a divinity student. There was this one pastor, preacher, that he really idolized. And he drove with a friend to go see this pastor speak at a given church. And he was really excited to see him. And then it turns out that he was sick or something happened. And so they had a supply pastor that came in to take his place. And he was so disappointed, annoyed, and irritated. And all through the sermon, he's just tearing this guy apart in his mind, everything that he did wrong and all how horrible it was. And when the sermon is mercifully over, he turns to his friend so that he can start deconstructing this poor supply pastor. And the woman is sitting there with tears streaming down her face, And it's like you realize, after my first sermon, I thought I could change the world with it, right? You have that hubris. And you realize that you put stuff out there and it's going to strike everyone different because of their experience with spirit and the moment and everything. And it has less and less to do with you and how they receive what it is they're receiving. And that also puts things into perspective as well. But hey, I've never been in a situation like Richard Rohr where the whole world is calling you genius, That's got to be really intoxicating. And I don't know how some of these people do it. And obviously a lot of them succumb to that worship and lose themselves in that. But that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to moderate our passions in a way that we don't want to lose our emotions, of course. And we don't want to be passionate about things that especially are at the center of our bliss. But we want to be able to stay present and really, really mindful of what's right here and right now, because that's the only place that we're going to intersect with God. To continue on, we are all temporarily inflated inside of any wonderful anything and become impatient and even harsh when anything gets in our path. Think of people on overstimulating vacations, or the bored, irritated looks of people in line for food, entertainment, or an airplane flight. The search for full fun is its own form of dualistic entrapment. What does that line mean to you? The search for full fun is its own form of dualistic entrapment.
What they want to do, whatever they want to do, not thinking about people who might not want to do what they want to do.
Okay. But the word that I want to focus on here is dualistic. Why would the search for full fun be its own form of dualistic entrapment?
It kind of sounds like fun only, like that's it. That they kind of want to eliminate any pain, anxiety, discomfort, worry, and go someplace where it's just entertainment and distraction and lots of food and lots of drink and just full fun. That's what it sounds like to me.
Okay. Yeah.
It sounds
yeah.
like it's
Fun is
also
bad, fun is good. Yeah.
yeah, it also sounds to me in the dualistic sense, you're either having full fun or you're just bored and you're not. It's like, this is terrible, this concert is terrible, or you're having a great time. Maybe there's nothing in between. That's how it hit me.
Or I'm thinking of the type of person who is always thinking about, like, they're at a fun party and they're thinking about, where is there a better party? Like, where did I run? Yeah.
FOMO.
Have
Yeah,
you
it's
ever
almost
been
like you've got.
talking-
Yeah,
Go ahead.
sorry. Yeah, no, I was just thinking, it's like that somehow you're going into it with an expectation in your head that it's got to be exactly this way as you envisioned it, and then boom, that artist was sick, he missed a few bars of the song, whatever. It just didn't meet that high that you were looking for. So it's like trashing them.
And how many times have we been around kids too? If you're babysitting or you're trying to do something really fun with the kid and they're having a ball, and then 4 minutes later they're just look at you and say, "I'm bored." It's like, what happened? You were having fun 5 minutes ago. How did you go from that to bored? Now they're something else for them to do,
There's a little bit of
The balloon burst, and now it's just
burst and now the party's over.
when we first moved to California, we got a book on the top things to do, and one of them was go to Hollywood Boulevard. And I remember having this, aura of Hollywood, and then we went to Hollyweird Boulevard. My gosh, what a balloon deflator. But it was one of those life experiences, where you're like, wow, I thought something was this, and it really isn't. The gloss was off of it.
Where you came
I
from,
think
Bill.
Betty
Right.
Davis said it. Betty Davis said it best. What a dump. When you go to Hollywood Boulevard, yes, it's not what it's cracked up to be. I cut somebody off. Who was that?
When I read the dualistic, what comes to mind is many things, but one in particular is the person that says, I need a vacation from my vacation.
Yeah, Gail uses the term sometimes a fantasy vacation, where you all just going to be a big happy family and your kids are just like, stop touching me,
He breathed on me.
It's like, that's when you need the vacation from the vacation. Really funny. Not real life.
No.
I think all of you are spot on with this. I'm thinking, the dualistic entrapment he's talking about is getting pushed to judge every single moment, good or bad, fun, not fun. Once we are all about the full fun that you guys have been talking about, that expectation, now we're judging everything against that impossible standard. And that's the entrapment into that dualistic kind of thinking, rather than just being able to experience and accept each moment as it presents, and to be able to see in the insignificant details that awe and your surrender to it, that this whole section has been about, this whole introduction has been about. Remember, this is an introduction into a discussion or the experience of contemplative practice. And so he's saying, if you don't have the ability to let your moments awe you, the most insignificant ones and the most insignificant details within those moments, if they don't have the ability to awe you, if you don't have the ability to let them awe you and shock you and then surrender to that, then you are not ready to have a contemplative experience. This is the whole point of it. And so if we are after full fun, if we come into our moments with that kind of expectation, then all we will do is judge everything in it, which is why Jesus says, don't judge, because as soon as you do, you are no longer being awed or shocked and surrendering to your moments. And this constant search for the passions, of course, if it's not moderated, is going to forever keep us out of those kind of moments. Let's see. He says such pleasure cruises, he calls them this search for full fun. These pleasure cruises can even be more dangerous than funks, more dangerous than depressions, right? Precisely because we are not prepared to spot them as problematic. Our culture has turned all of this into virtue. This is the way it's supposed to be, right? Oh, I see. Oh, wow. I actually have a real-time chat here from Dr. Wilson. Is awe a feeling? That's a great question. What do y'all think? Is awe a feeling?
I think it's kind of fun.
I'd say yes.
Linda said it is a feeling or kind of fun. Is that what you said, Linda?
Yeah, I think it's, I don't think it's really, how to say it exactly.
Okay. And then Ken, what did you say?
I said, yeah, it is, I think.
It is a feeling? Okay.
I think it's like more a sense or a sensation, a sense of, sense of awe, sense of.
Okay. Brady, are you making the distinction between a feeling and emotion?
No, not necessarily.
Okay. Okay. Just wondering. So we can use them as synonyms. Is awe an emotion? Is it a feeling?
Is it a
In
mental
other words, I
clar-
guess implied here is, can we have an excess of awe that we need to moderate as well then, right? Go ahead, William. What were you saying?
like a moment of clarity, like a mental thing, like ooh, like
Smell.
interesting.
Yeah, the light bulb moment. I go, oh,
Yeah, yeah.
ding, ding. Yeah.
They're
But it's a sense
momentary.
of wonder. Yeah.
Mm.
Okay, sense of wonder. Bill?
Hmm.
To me, the awe is just like a split. It's just a short snapshot. It's like after a thunderstorm, the sun breaks through and it's like so crystal clear, and there's that rainbow. You're like, wow, you know it's temporal, but it's like, wow.
Yeah.
And you know it's, the wind is blowing and it's blowing stuff through and it's not going to last, but it's like, it's a pinpointed wow. Or
Yeah.
listening to
Yeah,
a musician do just a beautiful rendition of a song, and you're like, it's a moment in time that you can appreciate, and then it's gone.
Mm.
Mhm, mhm.
yeah.
No, I
The,
think,
the, the,
go
the
ahead,
way I'm
Ellen.
seeing it too, it's like, yeah, you get that sense of wonder or awe, and then the feeling comes later, like this the feeling of joy or the feeling of angst, trivial or nothing, you know. That's how I'm seeing it now.
Yeah, I'm kind of going in your direction too, Ellen. I was thinking that for me and the experiences of awe that I have kind of emptied me out of everything, emptied me out of thought,
Mm.
emptied me out of feeling or emotion, and just completely just opened me up to what was happening. And then later, as I process it, I could have feelings about it. But it was sort of the absence of any feeling. It was just being so immersed in something at that moment.
Mhm.
That's pretty much similar to what I've experienced. It's just a moment, but it's a moment where I'm stunned. And it could be just a sunset or a song or a smile or I never know. But at that moment, I've kind of forgotten myself for a moment. And there's nothing egoic about it. It's just this moment. It's more like it's kind of like a state. And I also say there have been 3 times in my life where I was dead ass certain that I was going to die. And it was like, oh, I'm going to die. And what was interesting, it was very similar to awe. There was no emotion.
Hmm.
It was just like, oh,
Mhm.
and the emotion with death usually comes anticipation of the pain or whatever. And I've heard the same thing from veterans from war and cops I've talked with, and that is when they had those moments when they were certain they were going to die, it was emotionless. They were kind of stunned by the realization. It was like a state they were in. Oh, maybe OSHIT, but oh,
You're just, this is it.
and then
This is it.
feelings kind of
Yeah.
flood in later.
Yeah,
Mm.
exactly. That's my experience exactly. Yeah.
Hmm.
Now, just to finish off this paragraph before we quit for tonight, he says these pleasure cruises, right? They are not, of course, bad or sinful in and of themselves, just dangerous in the way they create the need for more of a good thing, which is how we get subtly fooled and set out on a wrong track. I guess that is why fortitude, temperance, prudence, and patience were called the 4 cardinal virtues from cardo, which means hinge in Latin. And even faith, hope, and love are not effective or healing unless they are hinged all onto fortitude, temperance, prudence, and patience. Again, the ancients were wiser than modern psychology might have assumed. So these 4 cardinal virtues, to really expand on them so we understand what we mean by fortitude, temperance, prudence, and patience, at least 2 of those being pretty archaic in our usage today. Temperance and prudence, we don't really use those anymore. We don't really use fortitude much either. But fortitude, of course, can mean courage, but it can also just mean endurance, perseverance, and resilience as well. The ability to bounce back to your original form when you've been pushed out of shape, bent out of shape. to be able to come back to your original form. Fortitude is all of those things. To be able to endure in the sense of James talking about endurance is what makes our faith complete. Temperance deals with discipline, self-restraint, and moderation. That's what we're talking about here. We're supposed to use temperance in these passions so that we can moderate them. Prudence has to do with thoughtfulness, has to do with wisdom, has to do with caution. So it's that part of us that stops, takes a breath, really takes a look at things, considers consequences, considers, the ethics of, is this going to do the greatest good for the greatest amount of people, so on and so forth. But that would be prudence. And then patience would be the ability to accept delay, work against our immediate gratification, also to tolerate suffering. This is kind of getting back to those traveling companions that Ken was talking about. But it also has to do with empathy in terms of the way that we look at others as we are accepting delay or tolerating suffering. It also has to do with flexibility, to be able to move and shift and move around obstacles that are in our way. Think about the expanded version of those 4 cardinal virtues, and you're starting to get a fuller sense of what it is that we're really talking about here. And of course, if we're talking about faith, hope, and love, faith being action as if something were true, even without the evidence, hope being analogous with trust, and then love with identification with the other. And so faith, the action, deals with now, the hope, the trust deals with not yet, and of course, love, the identification, deals with always. And so we have those 3 attached to those other 4, and you're starting to get a really full sense of how we go about moderating these passions, how we go about being able to stay present and stay humble and stay connected to everything that is now. And so the whole idea here, of course, these passions, positive or negative, have to be moderated. Otherwise, we're going to be blind to any deeper sense of presence. And so those excess emotions, while they are beautiful and they make us human, we can't get lost in them, or we're inside that bubble once again, just as surely as we can be inside an intellectual egoic bubble with all of our projections and illusions and misinterpretations. And we are at time. Any last minute short burning desires before we sign off tonight?
Dave, the only thing I'm thinking about is like when you hear a movie star or an actor or somebody or a artist of some type, they say, I want to leave on a high. So I'm going to just leave now, or this is my last movie, or this is my last book, or this is my last opera, because they maybe just don't want to have that come down. So they just say, I want to leave on the high and maybe kind of ride that wave as long as they can, because they know it's going to go away afterwards at some point.
Yeah. Which in a way is kind of sad, because if they really love their craft, how much more could they have done if they were really just enjoying the moment and not what the moment led to, or what they believed it should or could lead to? That's the whole key here. If we can start to see our moments as completely self-contained, as a complete expression of heaven, it's not leading anywhere. It just is. Now we're back to Danielle, who I guess signed off some time ago, but back to those isms that she was talking about yesterday, and just be there. Then we're not really concerned about leaving on a high. We're just concerned about, how much joy can we continue to bring if we're just really present to whatever it is we're doing. But yeah, I understand what you're saying about that, Kathy. And Jerry's here. Hi, Jerry. Good to see you, dear. And Vaughn's here too. Hello, Vaughn. All right. We have greeted everyone. All right. Over to you, Scotty.
Lord, thank you for this evening and time with my friends and the connections that we have and the shared joy we have in this journey together, just their very presence. increases my joy every time I see him. Lord, we lift up Marion and just ask you to help her with her physical condition and ailments and anything else that might be bothering her, and minister to Dave so he can minister to his family through this time as she gets better. Lord, help us to not be so focused on emotions and passions and desires as we are on the truth of you being revealed in our learning and our growing and our experiences, and finding you in everything that we encounter, which shapes our journey tremendously in a considerably more favorable way than being left on our own. So we appreciate all the attention you pour into us, Lord. We're ever so grateful. We thank you for this time. We praise you, Lord Jesus. It's in your holy name that we pray and we give our thanks and say our amens. Amen.
Man.
All right.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Scott.
All
Good
right.
night,
Thank you,
everybody.
everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, guys.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. See you
Good
next
night,
week.
good night. Good night. Good night, Rosemary. Good night, John. Hey, John, you're here, John. Hello, John. Good to see you, man. And of course, Jordana and Linda, see you guys. John, I'll see you Friday. Jordana, I'll see you Sunday. And Linda, I'll see you Saturday.
Okay, see you guys on the
Everybody.
weekend. Bye.
Okay.